questions.
Okay. Welcome everybody to our second BioReps online seminar. And I think it's still not too late to wish everyone a happy new year. We as BioReps team are very happy and delighted to kick off this new year with you. And hopefully 2025 brings all of us a lot of joy, success, and inspiration. And I think everyone can agree with me that this is the best way to start our year with this enlightening online seminar with our four distinguished guests. We have Mrs. Cheryl White from the Anton de Kom University, Marijke van Kuik from the University of Utrecht, Katrien Gersie from University of Amsterdam, and between all these ladies, we have Thomas Willems from the Ministry of Agriculture, Animal Husbandry and Fisheries. So during this seminar, we will have these guest speakers who will have a presentation for about 20 minutes. And we will follow with question and answers for about 5 to 10 minutes. Without further ado, I would like to invite Cheryl White. Before I do that, I hope that it is not a problem for people that we will record this seminar. So we have this as records for people who would like to review it. So I hope there is no objection if we record this seminar. Okay, so I will invite Cheryl White, who will give us a presentation. The title is Assessing Historic Biodiversity and Contemporary Use in the Upper Suriname River Area. Cheryl, the floor is yours.
We need to unmute Cheryl, I think.
Yes, you can unmute yourself. Not getting through, Cheryl?
I think you did share your screen, but the unmuting has not happened yet.
I can see it. Cheryl, you need to unmute yourself first.
There we go. Okay, better. Thank you. Thank you. Good morning and good afternoon. My name is Cheryl White, and I'm a senior lecturer in the Department of History and Faculty of Humanities at the Anton de Kom University of Suriname. And the title of my presentation today is Assessing Historic Biodiversity and its Contemporary Use in the Upper Suriname River Area. I'll add a disclaimer that what I'm presenting here today are concepts that I'm working through, so it's not hard and fast. But I want to begin by stating what some of my driving research questions are and the thought processes that I have towards answering them. Has it moved to the other? Hello? Are you seeing my next screen?
No, not yet. It's only the title slide.
First one, yeah.
Huh, this is strange. It's just working a moment ago. There we go.
Yes.
Okay. So how do we define Maroon ancestral settlements in Suriname within the context of the broader Amazonia? And how do we create an analytical scaffold that can withstand scientific objectivity? What I want to do is center my discussion around attempting to answer these questions by looking at archaeological excavation material, paleoecological analysis to understand the vegetation history of the site. The site is called Beng Tapu, and this is a place that's in the upper Suriname River floodplain, and also ethno-historical data from the Saramacca Maroon community that's been collected for many, many years now by myself. The data, it helps us to understand what the parameters are for attributing an archaeological site to a Maroon group. This is a long-standing challenge in the forested region of Suriname, that is for want of referential archaeological data. We just don't have enough information in the Sipilawini district of Suriname to really understand what connotes a Maroon archaeological site versus that of an indigenous site. So we're hoping that this research helps to bring us a few steps closer towards that. Okay, first, for those who may not know, I just want to give a brief overview of who Maroon peoples are. Suriname's African diasporic community is varied, but one of the most notable is its dispersed Maroon tribes. They were enslaved Africans that escaped from various plantations in the 17th century. They often traveled southward via creeks into the deep forest, primary forest, and initially away from the river floodplains. Suriname has 6 Maroon tribes distributed mainly throughout the tropical forests. The largest is the Saramacca, who number in the tens of thousands, to the Paramacca, another group, at less than 10,000 members. The other ones are the Mathawai, Okanisi, Aluku, and Quinti. And their presence on the landscape harkens back to how they actually used the landscape. They created well-defined and formidable groups by the better part of the 18th century via plantation raids and bouts of guerrilla warfare to sort of bolster their material ability to exist in the forest, but also learning how to use various aspects of the landscape. And by the late 18th century, when peace treaties were signed with the Dutch colonial government, they descended to the riverbanks, still in the forested interior, where they reside until today. So still tropical forest zone, but not in the primary forest or the dense bush. And what's interesting about their mobility is that we believe that as they were traversing the forest, they were appropriating old settlements that were once inhabited by indigenous people. Some of these settlements were located at intersecting creeks in the forest, but presented as a unique landscape feature in the form of ring ditches or forest mounds. These locations would prove to be a place of habitation, allowing for sustained agriculture and demarcated places of ritual activities, as well as living quarters. So the general study area is located in the district Sipilawini, and again, as I mentioned before, it's the site of Beng Tapu. Geographically, as I mentioned, it's in Sipilawini, which is essentially the entirety of the forested interior of Suriname. And the areas of habitation are marked by shifting cultivation, as you can see there on that lower map in yellow, surrounded by high dry land forest. Now, archaeological survey and excavation at Beng Tapu. How was the site of Beng Tapu discovered? For several years prior to the excavation, we conducted structured oral historical studies, reviews of anthropological literature, archival texts, and ethno-historical studies at several villages. And in terms of the oral history studies, this I think was 2015 or 16, I worked with Tropenbos, Suriname, to do a participatory 3-dimensional map of the Saramacca territory. And in the process of doing that, my task was to gather information about tangible and intangible heritage locales within what they defined as their traditional territory. And at the time, over 60 locations were reported. They reported places that they attributed to themselves, and they also reported places that they claimed were indigenous, old indigenous settlements. And Beng Tapu was one of these locales that was reported as Ao Kondi, meaning an old place of the Saramaccans. In terms of anthropological literature, a gentleman named Joris Joré wrote a dissertation back in the 1980s. I forget the actual date, but it was very useful because at the time he, at the time he pretty much mapped out, gave a map of all of these old settlements that he had also gathered during his field work, and Beng Tapu was one of these locations, and he actually mapped it. So the area in question is, for those of you that know the interior, it's a cluster of villages, Botopasi, Futunacaba, Pikinsay, and Beng Tapu is located between Futunacaba and Pikinsay, right by the government clinic called Debike, which was how it was represented in the dissertation of Joris Joré in the 1980s. In terms of archival references, there's a lot of information that was written by the Evangelical Brotherhood of Suriname, the EBS Church, about their infiltration on that river in the 1700s. They started on the river in the early 1730s, I believe. They had a bit of trouble really converting people. That didn't really happen until after the peace treaties were signed much, much later. But all of that information together helped to substantiate the presence of the Saramacca in that area, their historical presence at least in that area. And as well, just ethno-archaeological research that I've been doing for many, many years now in that area. So the study area is attributed to the Dombi Lo, which is a clan group of the Saramacca people. The Dombi hail from the area of Yodin Savannah, for those of you that might know, which is much further, somewhat northeast on the Suriname River in Suriname. And they are spread out over 4 villages: Botopasi, Futunacaba, Pikinsay, and Abenastone. Abenastone is a little bit further away. So during the oral history, we focused on speaking with persons of the Dombi Lo. I focused on talking with women farmers, because women, they spend a lot of time preparing their grounds and they often find things in the process. Hunters, because they know how to find places in the bush. They may not know anything about it, but they know how to find it. And traditional authority, because they can really help build that narrative about the location. So what you see there is us clearing the area. After the Tropenbos exercise, I went and just did a general survey, or walking pedestrian survey, and I saw a lot of objects on open footpath, a back path between the villages. And at this point, this is I think 2021 when we did this, we did a more structured randomized survey of roughly 250 by 250 meters with transects at 25-meter intervals, using a metal detector and an auger at 25-meter intervals to help identify dense concentrations of earthenware ceramics that are below the surface, metals, and any sort of landscape anomalies. And then after clear cutting, 2 activity areas were identified in the southeast and southwest quadrant of the site, based primarily on this sort of raised ground and the dense amount of low-fired earthenware and metal objects that were in the ground. So initially it was very, very dense bush, and then obviously we have to clear and open the area. What you're seeing there is one of the activity areas. This is after weeks and weeks of excavation. The activity area in the southeast quadrant. And there's 2 distinct activity areas. There's another one that's not in the picture there that's about 2 or 3 meters south of it. They're roughly 3 by 4 meters. The typical size of a traditional house, I might add, of a traditional Suriname maroon house. And it was made obvious by well demarcated assemblages of ceramic remains. And much of the paleo-ecological analysis was removed from a beautiful charcoal lens that we had in one of the clusters of artifacts there. Okay, not just here, but in the broader research area. So, in terms of the landscape analysis and understanding, what does it mean? What does this site mean in relationship to where Saramacans are calling their traditional territory? The imagery that you see here was done in collaboration with Dr. Nina Witteveen, so I cannot take credit for it. She was at the time at the Institute for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Dynamics at the University of Amsterdam. And AMS, C14 radiocarbon dating and phytolith analyses helped to reconstruct the chronology of the study region and its agricultural legacy. Soil and charcoal samples were collected from the charcoal lens of one of the excavation units within that feature that you saw there. Canopy vegetation analysis was aided by a drone during soil augers at intervals up to 250 meters east, that's 10 kilometers east and 10 kilometers west of the actual site of Bengtapu, into the broader study region. And the radiocarbon dates, the mean date of the site is 1750 AD, which is, again, interesting because this is just about 10 years prior to the signing of the peace treaties. And we know that already the ABS Church was well active in the area around this time. And this is the height of Maroon sedentism. And prior to the 1760s peace treaties and prior to the peace treaties with the Dutch. So the phytolith microfossils indicate crops of rice, as well as maize and banana, and a variety of species of palm seeds that are currently in use. And the intensification of palm species in and near Bengtapu is a strong indicator to its historic and contemporary ecological history. So what you're seeing there in this slide is the vegetative enrichment and use. Under the column that says phytolith analysis, these were the species that were present at the Bengtapu site and sort of radiated outward in close proximity to the site. And then a lot of these species are also mirrored in the ethnohistory and contemporary use of the community. So the analysis of phytoliths tells us that stratified and open forest ecological history of the region in proximity to the past habitation site boasts a variety of vegetation species that continue to be a part of the lived experience of Saramacca Maroons. The phytolith assemblages between the different land uses was assessed from these ecological zones. We had cultivation sites, a garden, abandoned fields, forest, and palm forest, and of course the archaeological site of Bengtapu. Now, the colonial period marked intense migration, land use, and sedentism by the Saramaccans. And these palm species, Camus, Maripa, increased significantly in proximity to Bengtapu, to the site. And they're still contemporarily used as building material and to meet dietary needs. Even though Maripa is also present in palm forest, it occurs naturally in the environment. The use of it is intensified in and near the cultivated areas near Bengtapu. Bengtapu, by the way, I should mention, is in a somewhat developed area. I mean, it's sort of, enclosed in the bush, but it's not, some archaeological sites you're doing like 8-10 kilometer hikes into the bush, and that's not the case here. It's pretty much within the floodplain by the riverbank. It's about half a kilometer away from the river. So it's not far at all, and it's right off a walking path as well. Sorry. So these palm species, Camus and Maripa, they increase significantly, and they're all anthropologic indicators of intense past human activity or habitation. Now, in the earlier ethnographic research that I've done with Saramacca Maroons in that same upper part of the river, I've observed many varieties of wood species that were used to build frames, house frames, like the Walaba. You can see there in the other side of the chart. The BC, and those are all also found near the riverside villages and in the primary forest as well, and typically several kilometers from the riverbank, respectively. And these trees are harvested only when they're mature. While wood varieties are used for house frames, palm fronds are typically used for roofing material. The most commonly used types are the Camus, the Palulu, and the Maripa. in addition to others. And palms like the Palulu, they can be found, I'm using the Sranantongo names because it's a little easier for me to pronounce than the Latin names here. So you'll see the Sranantongo. Sranantongo is a lingua franca of Suriname. The Sranantongo names and then the Latin names in parentheses. The palms like the Palulu can be found in secondary growth forests, and they're clear indicators of previously opened areas that have been reclaimed by vegetation, like old planting grounds or places that were once inhabited, like archaeological sites. And Beng Tapu did have an abundance of Palulu plants before we even clear cut the area. The Maipa palms can be found in abundance along riverbanks and also interspersed with the Palulu. Unlike the aforementioned palm species, the Tasi, or Tas, is the strongest and may be used independent of the others with minimal replacement and repair. So you have the Maripa, the Tasi, and the Palulu that are sort of used together to build for the roofing material for homes. And the Tasi, I was told, is probably the strongest and one that doesn't have to be, it can be there 5 years before it has to be replaced. And the Tasi is not readily available within the vicinity of the riverside, and it has to be harvested from the primary forest. Due to the abundance of the Maripa phytoliths, as well as Maripa seeds, we found burned seeds of Maripa in that excavation area there, the same excavation area where we took the charcoal samples from. It can be surmised that the area may have been enriched with a particular variety of palm, while the Awara, which is also overrepresented in the sample region, is associated with pre-Columbian fire episodes. Now, from the archaeological site of Beng Tapu to contemporary living space, there's also an increase of palms such as Podasiri. And as some of you might know, Podasiri is widely used here. I eat Podasiri all the time. It's also a seed that's produced from a palm, and you stamp it and you can drink the, how do I describe it? It's not quite liquid. Anyway, it's sort of like a shake kind of consistency. And it's widely consumed by Maroon people. Okay. Yeah, and so all of these varieties here, the Maripa is also used to make oil. The husk of the Maripa, we observed that it was also used for controlled burning during the making of pottery, maroon pottery, which is also a very distinct act in and of itself. You see there in the middle, I'm sorry, if you want to learn a little bit more about how Maripa palm is used in the firing process for pottery, you can check out a YouTube video called Dima Doti. It's about maroon pottery making. It's on, just look it up on YouTube. You see also their traditional Saramaka houses to get a sense of the size of it. It's, like I said, roughly about 3x4, 4x4 meters. The same size as the activity areas that we excavated at Beng Tapu. And just to give you an idea, in the other image there, you see how the Tasi and the PC, the tree, the timber is used, and how the Tasi is sort of interwoven with other palm fronds as well. And much of this research, as I said earlier, you know, we're attempting to delineate, or better delineate, what a maroon archaeological site looks like. Because out of the roughly 400 registered sites that we have in Suriname, over 95% of them are in the coastal zone. We have very few sites in the interior of the country where maroons live. And Beng Tapu is the second maroon affiliated site that we've discovered. The prior one was Kumako, which is another site that's a few kilometers north of Beng Tapu, but that one is a ring ditch, and it has clear indications of pre-Columbian as well as post-colonial occupation there. But it's also heavily revered within the social memory of the group, and I think that's what is important to understand here, particularly if you're trying to really delineate what's indigenous, what's maroon, is that many of these places are held within the cultural memory of the people, within the within their collective memory. So Beng Tapu for Saramakans, or particularly the Dombilo, that clan, wasn't actually a revered place because they saw it as a place where they were practicing sort of animistic, heathenistic behavior. Because shortly thereafter, after the church really infiltrated the river in the 1800s, there are other sites that are actually in proximity to Beng Tapu that represent the transition to Christianity. So, initially when we started this research for the archaeology, I had 5 sites that I wanted to excavate, and they wouldn't allow me there for various reasons. And I was told Beng Tapu, yes, go dig Beng Tapu. And that's because within their oral history, it's a place that represents sort of, how they were prior to becoming Christian people. So the point I'm trying to emphasize here is that in order to really make that delineation, we have to take into account the ethnographic data about how these regions, how the landscape is currently being used. I don't think we can rely solely on our archaeometric analyses, and so it's good information, but I don't think it's the sole determining factor for interpreting who existed where, when. Thank you. I don't know what my time is. I'm hoping I'm within the right time.
Yeah, that's over time. Thank you very much, Cheryl. So we can have some questions from the audience. Any questions?
Solomon?
Okay, I see Solomon.
Solomon?
You have to unmute,
Yeah,
Solomon.
you have to unmute.
Yes.
We cannot hear you.
Yeah. I unmuted already. Sorry. How did those the Maroons select the places where to go? We know from the study of Kathleen along the Upper Suriname River that there are several levels above the river level, 5 meters and 15 meters. Did they have preference for a specific type of sites? Distance and or hilly or say flat, or what was the way in which they selected the sites for their settlements?
Well, the sites are selected based on, yes, their ability to keep you dry, essentially, right? So I mentioned earlier a site called Kumako. I think you might be familiar with it, Solomon. It's a site that I excavated many, many years ago. And that particular site, within their cultural history, it's referred to as the Great Hill. And it is several meters high. It's a ring ditch site, and ring ditches are found all over Amazonia. And we radiocarbon the finds from there, and they radiocarbon to, I think, 260, as well as in the 18th century as well. Yes, in the 18th century as well. So 2 very divergent settlement dates. But Kumako is at the headwaters of 2 creeks. And we know that they were using the creek systems as a main migratory means of travel. The same thing with another site called Pondo Creek. Pondo Creek is descriptively similar to Kumako. It's at the headwaters of the Kleina-Komoena and the Tempati Creek in the northeastern part of the country. Both descriptively the same kinds of places. So that's where that argument of appropriating old indigenous settlement comes in. Obviously at that particular time in history, the goal was to stay hidden, right? So the goal was to stay hidden and away from any kind of, piercing eyes of militia that would have been searching for them to capture them and return them to the plantations. So Kumako is about 8 kilometers in the bush proper from someone mentioned New Aurora earlier. But this particular location is not. It's not that far away from the river bank. So, and it is several kilometers high up, but it's not necessarily a hidden place. It wouldn't have been hard for militia to find them. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll do one more question from Tinder.
Yes, thank you, Cheryl. I had a question about how was there indigenous presence in Beng Tapu or not? I didn't hear you well.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I mentioned the mean date, the 1750 mean date of the site, because most of the charcoal that was radiocarbon dated, much of it came from either Beng Tapu or it came from cultivated gardens near Beng Tapu, the majority of the charcoal. And Beng Tapu actually has the youngest date of the site, which is I think 96 BC, I think it is. But it's on a sloped area. It's not associated with any of these defined activity areas that we have. And archaeological sites in Suriname are notoriously shallow. So after about 20 to 30 centimeters, we reach what we call sterile soil, meaning soil that's without any sort of human indications of human activity. And the 96 BC date was well below I think the 30 centimeter cutoff level for it being, a site of, in recent activity. And there were very few objects associated with it, and it's on a slope. So it was interpreted as slope wash. Was there an indigenous presence in the area? We just don't have the archaeological data for it. I mean, the most information that we have about who might have been in the interior of Suriname is the Coriabo. And we know Coriabo sites are very distinct in their layout. They were appropriating, white sand hilly areas that are dispersed within the forest proper. They have a very distinct ceramic typology. You know a Coriabo ceramic when you see it. The rim has sort of this very highly decorated flower petal shape to it. There's none of that. There's none of that at the site. We're still finishing with the object analysis, believe it or not. So we're still busy with that. But all roads lead to it being a Maroon settlement. And there are many other settlements. Like I said, when Joris Horay did his dissertation back in the 1980s, he identified many locations where they were living in the 1700s. As a church came and people became, converted to Christianity, they would have these frictions with those that did not want to convert to Christianity and then break off and then move to other locations, but all within the river valley and all within that tight space of the river valley, going up to Dan. I know you know these places, Tinda, up to Tapuatra, the headwaters there of the Gran Leo and Peking Leo, where the rivers separate. So there are sites there. And the Maroon people are terribly mercurial when it comes to who can access where. So being able to assess all of these locations is always a challenge because, you have to do the community meetings and the grutus, that's what they're called, these formal meetings with traditional authority, and they don't allow you to go everywhere. Like I said, I had 5 sites. There was Beng Tapu, another site's called Sofi Buka, which is only about 100 meters away from Beng Tapu. But Sofi Buka is a place where they actually go to on a regular basis and do commemorative activities there, because it was a place that represents where they began their journey into Christianity. It was a break off from Beng Tapu into Sofi Buka. There's another place called Langomau and Kuakiki, which is much further in the interior. There are major creeks in the bush there, about 8 to 10 kilometers away from Botapasi and Futanakaba. Those, I believe, are indigenous settlements. Who can I attribute them to? I don't know. And I know they're indigenous settlements because of the descriptive information that was provided, again, during the Tropenbos participatory mapping exercise. And, I was told that there were objects, there was the Amazonian dark earth there, the beautiful Terra Preta, that there were objects there that were anthropomorphic in shape, but they didn't allow me, I couldn't get permission to go there. I just couldn't, no matter how much I begged. So it really is a matter of having greater data in order to make these kind of conclusive statements, and we just don't have that yet. And so that's why I sort of couch my presentation as, these are things that we're trying to figure out here. All roads do lead to Beng Tapu being primarily Maroon, although there's a lot still to be there's still a lot to be researched. That's as much as I can say.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.